this is a beginner guide or an intro to understanding spacing and space management in fighting games. I will go over all the concepts. Hopefully you will learn something from this. I also added a interactive controller on screen, so hopefully this will help you understand what I'm doing as well, because just seeing the character might not clue you in on everything that I'm pressing, right? And I will add this on every video, even combo videos, because I did get comments about that, and I think an interactive controller is perfect, especially for beginners, because you will see exactly the timing at which I press the buttons for the combos. Now, spacing includes 3 separate things. 1, your character's movement. So you can take up space by advancing on your opponent, or you can increase the space between you and your opponent by backing up, or dashing forward, dashing backwards. Or you can also dash block, or whatever the kids are calling it these days, wave dashing. Number 2, projectiles. Because projectiles can be used to keep away your opponent, and it controls the space between you and your opponent. And number 3 are advancing moves, such as Ashra's forward 2. This move pushes Ashra forward, which takes up the space between you and your opponent. And there are also moves that pushes you backwards, and it's important in this game because of cameos like Scorpion. So this is a space control tool, right? Or even pokes can be used to control a space between you and your opponent, because you're either taking up the space by moving forward, or you're stopping an approach. Now, we just went over what type of moves can be used to space, but there are 4 types of spacing in the game. There is close range, there is a poke and footsies range, there is mid-range, and there is a long range. Understanding those means that you understand what you can use at each of these ranges to be able to take up space effectively. So if you're long range, you have to use projectile. If your character doesn't have a projectile that goes full screen, you need to know the range of this. If you're at mid-range, you need to know what your character has that can take up space. So advancing moves, normals, projectiles, or a dash, of course. At footsies range, which is closer than mid-range, you need to know what you can poke and check your opponent with, and what will hit them or what will whiff, right? So knowing what to use at the different types of ranges is especially important to spacing in fighting games, and to understanding how to space properly and how to manage the space between you and your opponent. Another thing that is important when it comes to spacing in fighting games is at what range is your character most effective at. Now, this depends on their playstyle. For example, if you're playing a zoner, you want to be at mid to a long range, right? Because most of their attacks will reach that far. If you're playing someone that is like Ashra and has really good range and can hit you from pretty far away, you want to stay at mid-range. That is best for her, because most of those attacks are slow enough that if you do it in their face, your opponent can poke you out of them. If you're playing a character that is stubby and that is rush down like Melina, you want to be in your opponent's face, because that is where they'll be most effective. Same thing as a grappler, you want to be in your opponent's face. Now, Melina is a rush down character that is created specifically to be stubby, to not have a lot of far attacks, or projectiles that don't go full screen, because you're not meant to play her this far away. And her attacks don't reach very far, right? Because you are meant to play her at footsies to close range. This is where all of her attacks will connect. Understanding this is going to make a huge difference in how you learn characters, but how you play them as well. Because if you play a character how they're meant to be played, then not only will you have an easier time against opponents, they will feel much better to play as well. Spacing can be used offensively and defensively. So, for example, if I walk backwards with Ashra in order to avoid Sub-Zero's attacks, I am using spacing defensively, and I am essentially managing the space between me and him to be advantageous to me, to protect myself. So that is defensive. However, on the flip side of that, if I'm sitting at mid-range and I do a forward 2 with Ashra and it connects, then I am using spacing offensively, because I know that this will reach forward and hit him. Whether it hits him or not, doesn't matter if he blocks it or not, if he ducks it, it is still using spacing offensively. So how do you use spacing technically in a match, in an actual real situation? Well, if you see your opponent advancing towards you because they want to start their offense, you want to either back up, right? Use an advancing move, or use a projectile in order to stop their offense. You can also use spacing in order to punish your opponent for missing right in your face, right? That is called whiff punishing and is a main staple of fighting games, and where most of the time your damage will come from against good opponents. Because good opponents know how to be patient, know how to block your attacks, right? So using whiff punishing correctly can lead to a full combo, as you just saw, which is a big chunk of the offense game in fighting games, which is directly related to spacing, right? And how you use spacing offensively to your advantage, with advancing moves, with projectiles, and with the dashing, walking forward and backwards. Some characters will have better tools for this than others, but as I said, that is why you need to first learn a character to understand what range you want to play them at, because that will make a big difference. If you're sitting, you know, this far away and you're playing Melina and you can't hit your opponent with any normal attacks and you keep whiffing in your face, that should clue you in that you should get in closer to your opponent. I really hope this made sense. I wanted to do guides that are more in-depth, but that are shorter and have less information, so that maybe these concepts are easier to understand, especially for beginners. So I really hope this all made sense. If you have any other question, leave them in the comments down below. Either me or someone else will try to answer your question and help you out.